December 17, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Snow lay thick on the ground, wet and clinging, muffling footsteps yet amplifying the tension that hung like fog over the trees. In a shallow foxhole, Hans Müller, a veteran of the Eastern Front, pressed a pencil to paper, writing words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Americans are not like the Russians, he noted. Their artillery is something else entirely. It is not the volume of fire, though that is immense. It is the speed, the precision, the almost predatory awareness that you have no time to react. One moment there is silence. The next, the world erupts through the cold morning mist. Müller had witnessed a revelation that shattered every assumption. He and his comrades carried from years of fighting. The 6th SS Panzer Army had launched. Hitler's final gamble in the West with meticulous planning and brutal surprise. Thinly held American positions fell under the initial onslaught. Victory seemed within reach. Then the American artillery arrived. What no German soldier could have known, as they pushed through the frost-bitten undergrowth and over bombed-out trails, was that they were about to encounter the most lethal artillery system ever deployed in warfare. It was a system so devastating, so precise, so meticulously integrated that it would break the spine of Germany's last major offensive in the West, leaving no illusion about the industrial and technological supremacy of the United States. The collapse began long before the Ardennes. German veterans redeployed from the Eastern Front to face Americans in Italy. France and the Low Countries brought with them assumptions forged in endless battles against Soviet fire. Russian artillery, formidable though it was, fired in patterns that allowed for survival. Ranging shots that gave soldiers seconds to seek cover. A slow rhythm from observation to impact that permitted cautious movement. The Americans were terrifyingly different. Otto Schmidt, captured in Tunisia after fighting with the Afrika Korps, would later recount his first encounter with American artillery. They had settled in a wadi, convinced of the safety provided by natural cover. A small reconnaissance aircraft, insignificant in size and unarmed, drifted overhead. Minutes later, every man in Schmidt's company was dead or wounded. The aircraft had been a Piper L-4 Grasshopper, a forward observation plane so unassuming that soldiers underestimated its significance. What followed was not aerial attack, but a precise orchestration of metal raining. From the sky, coordinated to the second. One observer in a tiny cockpit could summon the destructive power of dozens of batteries across kilometers, delivering synchronized barrages with surgical accuracy. Lieutenant Friedrich Bauer, who had coordinated artillery on the Eastern Front, described his disbelief decades later. Reading captured American fire plans. Initially, he believed them propaganda. With fresh steel and fresh pilots, Ugaki watched the numbers pile up like an avalanche. 17 Essex-class carriers. By the end of 1944, 50 Casablanca-class escort carriers, built in under 2 years, ships sliding off. Assembly lines with the mechanical regularity of locomotives. Liberty ships appearing at the speed of mass production. Destroyers launched in months instead of years. It was as if the Americans had weaponized time itself. In contrast, Japan's shipyards flickered and sputtered. Only 6 carriers constructed after Midway. A dwindling supply of pilots. Fuel so scarce that training flights became luxuries. It was no longer a war of strategy. It was a war of arithmetic. The next memory came with the cold precision of crosshairs. October 24th, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. He saw again the black horizon, trembling with the vibrations of engines running too hard on too little fuel. He felt the thunder of explosions around the Musashi as American aircraft descended on the Proud. Battleship in waves coordinated, relentless, methodical. 19 torpedoes, 17 bombs, a volume of fire no battleship in the world could survive. He had watched from the Yamato's bridge as her sister ship listed, hesitated, then rolled helplessly toward the sea, swallowed by the very element she had been built to dominate. It was not a death, it was an erasure, a statement that no symbol of steel, no matter how immense, could withstand an enemy whose production capacity seemed limitless. Leyte Gulf was supposed to be Japan's decisive strike. Instead, it became a funeral march for an entire naval doctrine. 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 11 destroyers, lost in the largest naval battle in history. After Leyte Gulf, the Imperial Navy was a shadow-hollow ships without fuel, pilots without planes, bases without supplies. Yet the Americans kept pressing forward, their fleet expanding, multiplying like steel tidewater rolling toward the Japanese homeland. Ugaki could still picture the winter sky over Kyushu, streaked with contrails from American raids. He could still feel the ground tremble under the bombardment that no coastal gun could answer. Each strike carved another lesson into him. The Empire was out of time. His memory drifted next to April 7th, 1945, the last sortie of the Yamato. He hadn't been aboard, but he knew the men who died. He knew their pride, their illusions, their grim acceptance. The Yamato left with barely enough fuel for a one-way trip, a battleship reduced to a sacrificial weapon. American reconnaissance spotted her within hours. The sky darkened under swarms of carrier aircraft, and by mid-afternoon, the pride of the Imperial Navy lay torn open on the surface of the sea, flames blooming from her like malevolent flowers. By July, his diary entries had become increasingly haunted, cities destroyed in single nights, industries crushed, civilians starving, the atomic bombs, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria. Now the enemy's shells exploded above them, raining death vertically, indiscriminately. Training, experience, and instinct offered no defense. The psychological effect was as lethal as the fragments themselves, breaking cohesion, morale, and the will to fight. By mid-December, during the opening days of the Ardennes offensive, German forces, though initially achieving surprise and penetration, found themselves trapped by the speed and precision of American artillery. Batteries fell silent due to lack of mobility, inadequate ammunition, and overwhelming counter-battery fire. Each attempt to mass forces was met with destruction before action could commence. Every defensive position shattered before infantry could assault. Units suffered catastrophic losses, often 30 to 40% casualties in a matter of days, most inflicted not by direct combat but by artillery strikes. Survivors carried with them a profound recognition. The United States had mastered war on a scale Germany could not hope to match. Industrial might, meticulous training, and organizational efficiency created a system where even average soldiers could unleash extraordinary destructive power. Personal valor, tactical skill, and experience mattered far less than systematic superiority. The artillery that dominated the Ardennes and the Western Front was not a singular weapon but a testament to the transformative power of industrial-age warfare. By January 1945, as German resistance faltered and hope dwindled, the Americans had perfected the art of artillery warfare. The combination of forward observers, fire direction centers, industrial production, mobility, advanced fuses, and relentless logistics rendered German countermeasures obsolete. German soldiers captured and sent to POW camps in the United States witnessed firsthand a military system that was both terrifyingly efficient and methodically humane, professional, organized, and inexorably effective. The diaries, letters, and post-war reflections of men like Miller, Bauer, Schmidt, and Zimmerman reveal a sobering truth. American artillery, rather than tanks, aircraft, or infantry, was the decisive instrument that shattered German offensive capability. It was not merely a weapon of destruction, but a symbol of a nation's capacity to marshal intellect, industry, and innovation to the battlefield with devastating effect. For those who faced it, the realization was humbling. Courage and skill, even extraordinary courage and skill, could not overcome a system designed to anticipate, calculate, and destroy with precision. American artillery represented a new epoch in warfare, one in which individual heroism became secondary to systemic supremacy, and the lessons learned by German soldiers were cruelly timeless. The future of war belonged to those who could combine technology, logistics, and human coordination into a single, unstoppable force. December 26, 1944. The Ardennes lay in a silence that seemed unnatural, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Snow crunched under the boots of American infantry, patrols moving with careful precision along frozen ridges and valleys. The Germans, battered and demoralized, had begun to realize the full weight of the artillery that stalked them. Commanders who had anticipated victory now faced a cruel arithmetic. Their men scattered by devastating fire, their armored thrusts halted before they could coalesce, and their supply lines shredded by air interdiction and relentless shelling. The American system was a machine, and it had learned to exploit every weakness in the German operational structure. Hans Müller, once filled with the illusion of imminent triumph, now chronicled a different reality. The soldiers of the 6th SS Panzer Army were no longer advancing. They were retreating under a pressure so precise it defied understanding. The German army had long prided itself on operational initiative. The idea that skilled leaders and disciplined units could achieve success, even in the face of numerical or technological disadvantage. But initiative alone could not counter a force capable of observing, calculating, and delivering destruction faster than human reaction. Maps glowed under trembling hands, as if the paper itself feared the orders written on it. Each artillery strike was not merely a tactical blow, but a psychological assault, stripping men of confidence, sowing fear before any engagement even began. The coordination extended beyond sheer firepower. Forward observers, embedded with infantry, had eyes and ears on every critical ridge and crossroads. Every maneuver, every concentration of men was reported instantaneously to the Fire Direction Center, where officers with log tables and mechanical calculators transformed observation into annihilation. It was a choreography of destruction that left German commanders floundering, unable to predict where the next strike would land. Lieutenant Werner Vogel, who had survived multiple engagements, wrote in his diary of the paradox that tormented him. We could see them. We could hear them, but we could not fight them. The earth betrayed us before we had a chance to respond. Meanwhile, in the rear echelons of the American divisions, industrial and logistical planning proceeded with clinical efficiency. Ammunition depots were stocked and motorized, supply trucks ready to replenish, guns almost as soon as they had fired. The German artillery, with its reliance on horses and fragmented supply chains, could never match the tempo. Each American battery moved like a living organism, firing and then relocating before the enemy could identify its position. Displacement, previously a laborious and vulnerable process, became an almost instantaneous pivot. The contrast between an army clinging to outdated methods and one harnessing mechanized precision could not have been starker. The psychological toll on German units was profound. The human dimension of this, technological and industrial, supremacy was not lost on the prisoners of war who witnessed it firsthand. Sent to camps in the United States, they observed training exercises that revealed meticulous preparation. Artillery crews drilled relentlessly, learning to anticipate and execute time-on-target missions with machine-like precision. Forward observers integrated seamlessly with maneuver units, practicing communication, coordination, and rapid adjustment. Captured German officers marveled at the system's repeatability, the way average soldiers, properly trained, could execute missions of overwhelming effect that German units struggled to replicate even under the best leadership. For Hans Müller and his comrades, the lessons of the Ardennes were seared into memory. The war, once understood as a contest of bravery, skill, and tactical ingenuity, revealed itself as a contest of systems. Courage remained necessary but insufficient. Individual brilliance could not compensate for deficiencies in industrial capacity, logistics, and organization. The Americans had created an operational ecosystem in which artillery was not merely a weapon but a strategic instrument, capable of shaping battles, dictating tempo, and imposing a relentless psychological pressure on the enemy. By January 1945, as the Ardennes offensive collapsed, and the German army fell back to pre-offensive positions, the reality of American supremacy was unmistakable. Units that had entered the forest with confidence emerged shattered, decimated by artillery before significant infantry or armor engagement. Survivors carried stories of a new kind of warfare, one in which technology, industry, and organizational skill amplified human potential to a level that German forces could not match. Time on target, forward integration, and systematic planning had not just killed soldiers, they had rewritten the rules of operational art. The implications extended beyond the battlefield. German military thinking, long-rooted in initiative and tactical audacity, encountered a force that had industrialized decisiveness itself. Even the most audacious maneuvers were subject to the cold arithmetic of American firepower. As historian post-war analyses would later confirm, it was the artillery system, not tanks, not infantry, not air power alone that determined the tempo and outcome of the Ardennes and, by extension, the Western Front. each shell delivered simultaneously, each position observed and struck without warning, each supply chain synchronized with precision, all revealed a transformation in warfare. The Americans had turned the battlefield into a landscape governed by data, timing, and industrial might, making the enemy's valor almost irrelevant in the calculus of survival. January 1945, the remnants of the German 6th SS Panzer Army retreated through the snow-laden Ardennes, their morale shattered, their ranks depleted. Winter had become a relentless adversary alongside the Americans' artillery. Roads were slick with ice. The frozen ground made digging defensive positions arduous, and supply lines were threadbare. Yet even in retreat, the Germans faced a grim truth. The Americans were not merely defending, they were hunting. Forward observers and reconnaissance units turned every ridge, every valley into a potential kill zone. The forest itself had been weaponized through observation and fire coordination. Colonel Karl Hoffmann, a staff officer with experience on the Eastern Front, wrote in his diary, "We are ghosts moving through a landscape that does not belong to us. Every ridge conceals eyes that report our presence, every hollow a threat. We are no longer armies. We are targets." Hoffmann's words reflected a growing recognition among German commanders that the battlefield had been transformed by American operational art. It was no longer enough to maneuver or conceal. Survival demanded technological parity, logistical depth, and a precision of coordination the Germans simply did not possess. The American forces, meanwhile, pursued with relentless momentum. Artillery units were not stationary relics of past wars. They were mobile, synchronized, and adaptive. Batteries redeployed continuously, keeping German counter-battery efforts in disarray. Time-on-target barrages struck multiple locations simultaneously, saturating the battlefield with shells before German units could reorganize. The effect was both material and psychological. The Germans could see their comrades cut down, positions destroyed, and yet had no means to respond effectively. Air support, though limited by winter weather, augmented the artillery system. Reconnaissance planes observed movements through breaks in cloud cover, feeding coordinates to artillery units for rapid strikes. The integration of intelligence, observation, and firepower created a web from which German units could not escape. Even small squads attempting to regroup or move supplies were vulnerable to sudden bombardment. Each day, attrition reduced numbers and morale, compounding the sense of inevitability that Hoffmann described. In the midst of this operational crucible, German tactics began to unravel. Armored thrusts, the hallmark of blitzkrieg doctrine, became suicidal. Concentrating tanks in any sector invited annihilation by well-coordinated barrages and anti-tank teams guided by forward observers. Infantry units, forced into defensive pockets, could neither maneuver effectively nor escape fire zones. Attempts at counterattacks were fragmented and poorly timed, often resulting in catastrophic losses. German ingenuity and courage were no longer sufficient to overcome systemic superiority. The human cost was immense. Soldiers who had entered the Ardennes with confidence were now exhausted, frostbitten and demoralized. Units disintegrated under pressure, and command structures strained to maintain cohesion. Hans Müller, recording the fate of his comrades, wrote, "We are no longer soldiers of skill, but of endurance. The forest has become a graveyard of our hopes. Each step forward is measured against the certainty of shell fire, and every order risks destruction before it can be obeyed." Yet the Americans' operational mastery did not rely solely on firepower. Logistics, communication, and training ensured that the system functioned like a clockwork mechanism. Ammunition and supplies flowed continuously. Communications remained intact despite battlefield chaos, and units executed complex maneuvers with remarkable speed. Every component, infantry, armor, artillery, reconnaissance was integrated into a network capable of adjusting in real time. The Germans, by contrast, struggled to coordinate even small movements, hampered by disrupted communications, fragmented units, and inadequate supply. By mid-January, the Ardennes campaign had been decisively repelled. German forces withdrew to positions closer to the Rhine, battered and demoralized, while American units consolidated gains and replenished losses. The battle had demonstrated, more than tactical skill or individual bravery, it had revealed the transformative power of a fully integrated, industrially sustained military system. Time-on-target barrages, mobile artillery, coordinated observation, and relentless logistical support had combined to produce effects far beyond the sum of their parts. In post-war analysis, historians would describe the Ardennes as the moment when modern combined arms operations reached new heights. Artillery was no longer a support arm. It was the central instrument shaping operational tempo, dictating maneuver and imposing psychological pressure. Courage and leadership remained important, but systemic efficiency had emerged as the decisive factor. The Americans had not merely won a battle, they had showcased a new paradigm of warfare. For the surviving German officers, the lessons were indelible. Even the most audacious strategies could be nullified by a system capable of observing, calculating, and delivering destruction faster than human reaction. The Ardennes had proven that wars could no longer be won on instinct, audacity, or individual heroism alone. Industrial capacity, coordination, and precision were now the ultimate arbiters of survival and victory. Hans Müller, reflecting on the ruins of the Ardennes and the fate of his comrades, wrote, "We faced a force that had turned every forest, every hill, every road into a weapon. We fought, and yet it was as if the war had been decided before the first shot was fired." January, March 1945. In the aftermath of the Ardennes, the Western Front entered a phase of relentless American advance. The shattered remnants of German forces were no longer capable of mounting coordinated resistance, and the Allies leveraged this systemic advantage to press forward. Logistics, coordination, and firepower demonstrated so decisively in the Ardennes became the blueprint for every subsequent operation. The Siegfried Line, once thought to be an impenetrable bulwark, now presented a series of tactical obstacles rather than strategic barriers. American engineers and infantry units moved methodically, supported by artillery that could strike multiple objectives simultaneously. Time-on-target barrages became a signature tactic, suppressing defenders before assaults even began. German artillery, limited in both numbers and ammunition, could no longer contest these strikes. Every position the Germans held was effectively under continuous observation and potential destruction. Colonel Hoffmann, now retreating toward the Rhine, recorded the collapse of morale in his units. "Our soldiers are like shadows fleeing a storm. We hold positions because orders demand it, not because we believe in them. Every day brings the knowledge that our sacrifices are insufficient, our weapons inadequate." The German command structure, once flexible and audacious, had become reactive, forced to plug gaps in an increasingly untenable front. American armored units spearheaded advances through the Rhineland, coordinated tightly with artillery and air reconnaissance. Pockets of resistance were rapidly encircled and neutralized, often before German commanders could react. Mobility, sustained supply lines, and real-time communication allowed American forces to exploit even minor German weaknesses. It was a war of speed, precision, and relentless pressure, the exact opposite of the protracted attritional battles the Wehrmacht had favored in earlier campaigns. The psychological dimension was as significant as the physical. Time-on-target barrages inflicted not just casualties, but pervasive fear and exhaustion. Soldiers learned quickly that concealment was temporary, movement was hazardous, and no ridge or forest offered safety. Units became hesitant, defensive, and increasingly prone to disintegration under stress. In letters smuggled from the front, soldiers wrote of an invisible hammer striking relentlessly, a force that seemed to anticipate every move and render initiative meaningless. By March, the Allies had crossed the Rhine in multiple sectors. The German military's capacity to resist had been systematically dismantled through attrition, precise coordination, and superior operational art. Each success reinforced the underlying principle that industrialized warfare now required more than bravery or tactical skill. It demanded integration, speed, and the ability to deliver decisive effects across the battlefield. The Ardennes had been a microcosm of this transformation, but the Rhine crossings and subsequent advances demonstrated its broader application. American forces had institutionalized a method of warfare in which artillery, reconnaissance infantry, and armor operated as a single coherent instrument. The Germans, despite experience and training, could no longer match this systemic efficiency. Individual heroism, while visible, was ultimately overwhelmed by the sheer scale and coordination of American operations. Historians would later note that these months marked the final evolution of U.S. combined arms doctrine in the European theater. The lessons learned were not just tactical, but operational and strategic. By integrating firepower, observation, mobility, and logistics, the Americans had created a force capable of decisive, continuous pressure. The effect was cumulative. Every destroyed position, every lost soldier, and every disrupted supply line contributed to an inevitable collapse. For German commanders, the Rhine crossings were a bitter confirmation of the lessons from the Ardennes. Warfare had become a science of observation, calculation, and systemic efficiency. Survival and victory were no longer determined solely by courage or audacity. Colonel Hoffman's final diary entry before captured this grim reality. We fought, but we were outmatched not by the enemy's courage, but by their system. The forest, the river, the road, everything belonged to them before we even arrived. We were ghosts, and the world had moved on without us. The Western Front in early 1945 had thus become a testament to the transformative power of modern operational art. The Americans' ability to synchronize multiple components into a cohesive, flexible, and overwhelming force had changed the nature of warfare forever. Battles were no longer isolated struggles of attrition or heroism. They were carefully orchestrated symphonies of destruction, where every unit, every shot, and every movement contributed to a single, unyielding objective: victory. April-May 1945. Germany itself was a landscape of ruin. Cities once vibrant now lay in ash, railways severed, and bridges shattered by relentless Allied bombardment. The Wehrmacht, already hollowed by successive defeats, faced the inexorable pressure of an enemy whose artillery, mobility, and industrial might had become virtually unstoppable. The final chapter of the European War was not marked by singular battles, but by a cascade of operational collapses, each amplified by the systemic superiority the Americans had honed since the Ardennes. American forces moved with unrelenting precision. Infantry units advanced under the protective umbrella of artillery that could deliver massed, coordinated fire in minutes. Bridges and roads, often destroyed in desperation by retreating Germans, were quickly repaired or bypassed, ensuring the supply of ammunition and fuel never faltered. Forward observers moved fluidly with assault units, directing barrages that isolated resistance points before soldiers ever engaged. The Germans, in contrast, could muster little beyond desperate defensive pockets and ad hoc counterattacks. Major Friedrich Lang, commanding a decimated battalion near Cologne, chronicled the futility of resistance. We knew the Americans were coming, not merely to fight, but to erase every trace of us in their path. Orders mattered less than our ability to survive one more hour. Our positions, no matter how carefully prepared, became graves before the first shot was fired. These were not isolated experiences. Across the Western Front, German units found themselves unable to mass, unable to maneuver, and unable to defend, effectively against an opponent who combined overwhelming firepower with meticulous operational planning. The psychological toll was staggering. Soldiers accustomed to rigid hierarchy and tactical initiative on previous fronts were now confronted with an enemy whose system rendered individual skill nearly irrelevant. Time-on-target barrages, the integration of armor, artillery, and infantry, and the seamless coordination of supply and mobility created an omnipresent threat. Even experienced commanders hesitated to concentrate forces, understanding that doing so would invite immediate annihilation. The industrial might of the United States proved decisive at every level. While German factories lay in ruins and resources dwindled, American production surged. Artillery, vehicles, ammunition, each element of combat power was available in abundance. The result was a strategic suffocation. No matter where, German forces attempted to regroup or counterattack. They were outmatched not only in equipment and numbers, but in the very logic of warfare itself. Forward observers like Lieutenant James Carter directed fires with near absolute certainty. Using FM radios resistant to interference, Carter could coordinate dozens of batteries across multiple sectors. When a German counterattack formed within minutes, it was met with a cascading wall of shells. Villages, forests, and road junctions became zones of overwhelming destruction, leaving survivors to flee or surrender. The precision and speed of these operations left little room for improvisation, creating a relentless rhythm of devastation that German forces could neither predict nor escape. In the Ruhr Pocket, tens of thousands of German troops found themselves encircled. Artillery rained down relentlessly, cutting off escape routes and breaking cohesion before infantry engagements could occur. Observers documented entire battalions rendered combat ineffective within hours. The siege was a practical demonstration of all the principles learned and refined since 1944: industrial capacity, centralized coordination, integrated reconnaissance, and the tactical application of overwhelming firepower. By early May, American forces had crossed the Elbe and were advancing on Berlin from the west, even as Soviet troops approached from the east. The Wehrmacht's final stands were largely symbolic. They could not match the operational sophistication, industrial support, or psychological dominance of the Allies.